I had a friend, and his name was Dave. Dave and I worked together, and it was 1992. At this time, I was just started dating someone new, and AIDS was a big thing in society. People were scared. And she and I were getting ready to consummate the relationship, so to speak, and we decided that we should go have an AIDS test. So we had the test, and things were good. I've gotten to work the next day, and I walked up to Dave, and I said to Dave, "Hey, great news, passed my AIDS test, it was negative." And Dave kind of nodded and smiled, and looked at me and said, "Yeah, not me, I'm HIV positive." And I was just floored. I'd known Dave for a few months, he was a really nice guy, and I had no idea that he was HIV positive. That's not something you just share with people. And I thanked him for sharing that with me, for telling me something that personal, that he had a death sentence, and how terrible things were. And that was that. About a month later, Dave quit. And I didn't see him for a year. For a year. And to be honest with you, I probably didn't think about him all that much for that year. Dave had gone traveling. When that year was up, Dave came back. And he called me and said, "How are you going?" I said, "Yeah, I'm all right." And he said, "Well, I'm back." And I said, "Oh, that's cool." And he said, "You want to get together?" Sure. So I drove out to Dave's house. Now, as I said, I hadn't seen Dave for a year, and we just started talking. We talked about nothing at first. We just talked about his travels, and we talked about life, and we talked about how I had quit that job 6 months ago. I wasn't there anymore. And I asked him about Christine. Now, Christine was Dave's friend. Christine was the person who got Dave the job at the call center that we worked at together. They had gone to school together from the time they were this big. So like from grade 1 all the way through, Dave and Christine were really good friends. And I asked him about Christine, and he said he didn't know what was going on with her because she was no longer his friend. When she found out that he was full-blown AIDS, not just HIV positive, she stopped being his friend. By the way, Dave was now full-blown AIDS. That's why he came home. After a year of traveling, he was that sick that he couldn't travel anymore. And he'd come back to live with his mom and his stepdad, but I'll talk about them in a few minutes. So Dave told me how Christine had just stopped being his friend. And I just couldn't believe that. To me, that just was horrible. And then he also told me that a lot of the people in his life stopped being his friend. Now, I'll tell you a bit more about Dave. Dave was openly gay at a time when it was very scary to be openly gay. We were in Portland, Oregon. It was 1992. It was a very, very different world. He was a very good-looking young man and just a really, really nice person. And Dave told me that almost all of his friends, straight and gay, had pretty much abandoned him. And this is probably the time in his life when he needed people more than anything. Because I don't know if you've seen the movie Philadelphia, if you remember that, Tom Hanks. This was Dave's future. Dave was going to get weak. Dave was going to get skin blotches. Dave was going to lose a lot of weight. Dave was probably going to go blind. And eventually Dave was going to die. And everybody had abandoned him. And we sat that night and we talked and we talked and we talked. And it was probably midnight. Had a few beers. And I decided I had to go. It was time to go. I got in the car and I drove home. I drove half drunk. That's a different story. And on the drive home, I made the decision that I wasn't going to be one of those people. I wasn't going to abandon Dave. I was going to be his friend. That was just my decision. It doesn't make me the hero of the story. The hero of the story is Dave. I'm kind of a dickhead. I've done a lot of bad things in my life, a lot of bad stuff. I have a son who, his mother and I split when he was 2, and I didn't see him in my life for a really long time. I'm not any sort of really good guy, but this was a decision I had to make. So I went home that night. A couple days later, went over to see Dave again. And we just started talking. Smoked a couple joints, drank some beers, and talked. We didn't talk about AIDS, we didn't talk about death, we didn't talk about Christine. We talked about normal stuff. We talked about life, we laughed, we joked. We just had the best night. It was great. And to be perfectly honest with you, Dave was not really somebody who was my friend before. We were more acquaintances. We had a connection, but we were never really friends. And I was thinking to myself, if it wasn't for this disease, would I have even really become friends with Dave if I didn't know this? Would this have happened? And it did, and it was beautiful. And for the next 11 months, this is how life went. I'd go and visit Dave all the time. And one night in particular sticks out a few months into this. Dave was starting to get a little sicker. And we started talking, and we had that conversation that, I don't know if anybody else has had it, but I've had it a few times in my life now, and it's usually more hypothetical, but in this case it was real. Do you want to die before you get really sick and all the pain happens? Or do you want to stick it out and see it all the way through? And Dave said that night he wanted to die. He didn't want to be in all that pain. He didn't want people to see him looking emaciated. He didn't want people to see skin blotches. He wanted to go so people could remember who he was. That was his choice that night. And that was that. And that night ended and I went home again. Now, every time I go to Dave's house, it was very, very similar thing would happen. Either his mom or his stepdad would greet me at the door, and they'd give me the medical update on Dave and tell me what happened. I'd probably go to his house 2 to 3 times a week. And to be honest with you, they'd give me a medical update, but they looked like they were more in need of medical attention than Dave or I, because they were the ones who were really taking care of Dave, and that's a lot of work. That is a lot of work. And they had something on their mind that no one should ever have to do, watching a child die, watching someone that your offspring die while you're still here. And that's what they were dealing with. Now, I'll tell you a bit about his parents. Dave told me that his mom told him when he came out to her that she knew he was gay from the time he was about 3. She was beautiful. She was just a lovely, lovely, lovely person. And the nicest person. One of those people who, you know, when you go to the house, they always want to give you food and something to drink, no matter how much you've had, and going to keep pushing. That was her, just beautiful. Dave's dad was like the antithesis of her. He was like a man's man. He was stoic. He was like John Wayne, you know, in the movies. He was a truck driver, a long-haul truck driver, 6'4", muscles on top of his muscles, okay? Always wore a ball cap. One of those guys. And part of the reason that Dave decided to go traveling was because his relationship with his dad, his stepdad, was a bit tough. He couldn't accept that Dave was gay. He had a very, very hard time accepting that because he was brought up in a different generation, in a different world. So these were Dave's parents. Now, we had lots and lots of visits, and lots and lots and lots of visits, and lots of great times, and lots of really sad times, and we talked a lot. And about 6 months after the initial conversation about dying, Dave was really sick. He was really sick. He looked like you knew he was going to come out looking. He was almost a skeleton. There were skin blotches. He was losing his vision. He was pretty weak. But every time I got there, he smiled. There was just always a smile. Always a smile. He lit up a room. And Dave and I started talking on this particular night. And I said to him, do you still want to die before you go through any more of this? And it was amazing how much that had changed within him. And this is, to me, just the revelation of the gift that he gave me. He changed his whole demeanor. He didn't want to die anymore. He wanted every last breath he could have on this earth. He wanted to be here for everything he could be here for. He wanted to spend that time with his family and with the few friends he had left. And that's what he wanted to do anymore. He wanted to fight to do that. I went home that night and I thought to myself, how did I get into this? Who am I to be talking to someone who's dying? What do I even know about this? You know, this is crazy. I was a lot younger then. I wasn't very knowledgeable, but it was my lot in life. It was where I was, and Dave needed me, and a part of me needed Dave. About a month later, it was a Tuesday night, my phone rang, and it was Dave's dad. And he called to tell me that Dave had died. I knew Dave was dying. He knew Dave was dying. Everyone knew Dave was dying. But when the words came out and I was told he died, I cried. Like for a really, really, really long time. Like a really long time, I just cried. And I felt bad because I didn't get to say a proper goodbye to Dave. I had been there on Sunday and this was Tuesday, and Dave had the death rattle. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but that was the first time I'd heard it, and sadly I've heard it since, and it's a horrible sound. It's someone who's struggling to breathe, and it almost sounds like an actual rattle is in their chest as they intake and put out oxygen. And Dave had that rattle, and you knew the end was near. But still, that phone call just hit me like a ton of bricks. So that was Tuesday. That weekend on Sunday, they had a gathering for Dave at his parents' house. And I went, and I got there, and the only people I really knew were his parents. Dave had sisters there. I had never met them. Like, I knew of them, but we had never really crossed paths. He had friends that I didn't know there. Fucking Christine wasn't there. Yeah, exactly. There was this, my biggest memory was there was this board, and it was an easel with a big cardboard cutout. And it had all of Dave's school pictures from grade K through 12. And all those pictures were there, and you could just see Dave growing up. And it made me smile. It really did. It was a really beautiful thing. And I talked to people I didn't know. We were in the backyard. A few people got up and spoke. A lot of it's a blur. I sat there, had a couple of beers, hung out for a little bit after everybody stopped talking, and decided I really needed to go because I was really sad, and I didn't know people there, and I just felt uncomfortable. So I went and said goodbye to Dave's mom and his sisters, and I found his dad. And I told his dad I was leaving. His dad said, "Come on, I'll walk you out." And we walked along the side of a house. And along the side of the house, this little like alleyway like you have on the side of most houses. We're just walking along, and me and this big truck driving man. And he looked at me, and he put his arm on my shoulder and said, "Yeah, Dave really was lucky to have a friend like you." And I thought to myself, I was the lucky one with the stuff I learned from Dave. And I looked at his dad and I said, "Dave was lucky to have a dad like you." And he looked at me kind of funny. I said, "He loved you a real lot, and he knows how hard this was for you," because David told me these things. And this 6'4" man just broke down and cried. And I mean, he hugged me for a good 5 minutes, and we didn't say a word. We just cried into each other's shoulders. And that's what I remember most. That's what I really remember is that moment. And I would love to tell you that we started a scholarship fund up for Dave and started helping people with AIDS or something beautiful like that, but that's not reality. The reality was I never went back to that house. My connection there was Dave, and Dave was gone. But I guess the reason I wanted to share this story was because at some point in our life, if you haven't already done it, you're going to meet somebody who's sick, who's dying, who's in that moment. And it's so hard to know what to say. It's so hard. We're so scared we're going to say the wrong thing. We're so scared we're going to fuck up. We're just really scared of it. And my takeaway from this whole thing is Dave needed people to talk to. He didn't need people to feel sorry for him. He didn't need pity. He needed human interaction like we all do. And I don't want to preach or moralize any more than that, except to say, be nice to people, love all your friends, and if you see somebody that looks like they're in trouble and needs to talk, sick, whatever it might be, don't shun them, talk to them. You can't fuck up, they just need to talk to you. And that's my story.